Hey folks, and welcome to this week's Weaver's Woodshop. This week I will be making a wooden mallet, and I will be making that wooden mallet out of Wenge, maple, and Cuban mahogany. And the pieces for the mallet will be the Wenge and the Cuban mahogany, and the handle will be the maple. The pieces for the mallet head will be cut in the dimensions of 3 inches by 4.5 inches, and the handle itself will be 1.5 inches wide by 14 inches long. And here you see me cutting the Cuban mahogany down to the 3 inches by the 4.5 inches. And now that I have the pieces for the mallet head cut to length, and actually the pieces of Wenge, the dark pieces there, it came in about a 9-inch width, so that's why they look so long. It's time to find the center of that piece of Cuban mahogany, so that's what I'm doing there, because I've actually got to cut that in half to where I can get my gap for where my maple handle is going to end up going. So that's what I'm doing there, is I'm finding the center where I can go back over to the miter saw and cut this piece in half. And then once I have this piece cut in half, I'm going to go back over to the work table, and I'm just going to lay stuff out, and I just want to get a visual of what I've got going on. I still have to work on the handle some and get the shoulders cut and the center line cut, and we'll go over a little bit more of that in detail in a few. But right now that's what I'm doing. I just want to visualize everything before I get any more work done on anything. All right, now that I got the pieces of the mallet head squared away, now it's time to get my handle all squared away. And what you see there over the fence of my table saw, I saw this little jig that Matt over at 731 Woodworks that he made to make the handles for his mallet. So I just took that and copied that, and it worked out pretty dang good. What you saw me first do is make sure that the blade is squared to the table saw, and with that jig there, you just clamp the handle to it, and it makes it real simple to make that shoulder for it to slide on up into the mallet head, and it works out real great. And then it also makes it easy to make that center cut for where the wedge is going to go up in there, which is what I'm doing right now, where I'm smoking that blade. Guess it's time to clean it or check and see if I need a new blade or not. So that's what I just did, is cut that piece where the wedge is going to go down in there once I've glued that handle up into the mallet head. And now here I am back over at the workbench. It's time to start drawing some lines. So that's why you see me here making sure that the handle is right in the center of that piece of wenge, because I'm going to draw some lines down on that piece of wenge, because I need to make sure everything's centered up so I know where to glue the pieces of Cuban mahogany, just so I make sure that gap between the pieces of Cuban mahogany is just right. And you'll see how I go about doing that. And it works for me. And I'm sure there's other ways out there to do that. And and I'll try a different way next time that I do this. But this is the way that I do it this time. And again, it works for me. I'm not saying it's the only way out there. There's 10 different ways to skin a cat. So, I mark the center line of the handle, and then I mark the edges where I've got those cuts at, and then that way I know that I don't want any glue in that channel where that handle is going to go. because if there's any dried up glue in there, I'm going to have a heck of a time getting that handle up in that channel. So that's what I'm doing now, is I'm marking those lines where I do not want any glue. And so, like I said, it would just make it a whole, it'd make it crazy trying to clean that glue out of there, especially once it's dried, when you only have an 1.5 inch gap. I mean, I'm sorry, 3/4 of an inch gap to try and clean that glue out of there with. So here I go, actually gluing it and spreading it out, and we'll clamp it up and we'll leave it overnight and come back the next day and unclamp it and see what she looks like. And if you guys enjoy this type of content, if you wouldn't mind going ahead and hit that little like button and subscribe to the channel, I sure would appreciate that. Now that we've got both pieces of that Cuban mahogany all glued up and set down on their lines, it's time to get that handle in there and get everything set just right. So that's what I'm doing now, getting it in there so that gap will hopefully be just right for when I put that wedge down in there and get that handle nice and snug tomorrow. So that's what I'm doing now, getting that gap just right and trying to get everything flush on the top and on the bottom. And to be sure not to make any unnecessary marks or indentations on my nice wood there, I'm going to use a couple of pieces of scrap wood in order to clamp it overnight with my clamp. So that's what I got there, just clamping it up, putting a couple of pieces of scrap wood in between the clamps, so I don't, like I said, have some unnecessary issues to fix in the morning. So again, that's what I'm doing there, and I'm clamping it up, and I'll let it set overnight and come back tomorrow and check it out and see what we got. Now here we are, the drum roll, big reveal, right? So taking those clamps off and removing the scrap wood. So that's what I just did, and there it is. Typically when you take the clamps off of a project, you're like, oh wow, that looks pretty cool. But there it is, just slid the handle in, and that's kind of what it looks like. But so far it doesn't really look that cool, does it? So I'm taking it over to the miter saw and trimming it down pretty much to size. Um, and But yeah, it'll start taking shape here before too long. All right, now that I got all the edges flush, now I'm going to go ahead and I've got the miter set to 3 degrees because that's what I got the edges of the mallet set at, is 3 degrees. So now's when that mallet head starts to take a little bit of shape. So I'm getting the other side set to exactly 3 degrees, and I'm going to go ahead and slice it down. And like I said, now it's really starting to take shape and starting to look a little bit more than just a couple of pieces of wood glued together. Now here I am with the router. I'm going to go around all the corners and put a nice little edge on it again. Just try and soften those corners up. And I think that helps a ton with this mallet. Now that it's all routed up, it's time to sand. And since I'm using Odies oil on it, I'm going 80 grit, 120, 220, then 320. I believe with Odies oil, you can go all the way up into the thousands. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure you can. But like I said, I'm going 80, then 120, then 220, then 320. And it always works out pretty slick for me with that Odies oil. So like I said, that's the steps I'm going through here: 80, 120, 220, then 320. All right, now that all the sanding is done, it's time to put it together. So naturally, it's time to get the old tight bond out. So got the glue all spread on the handle and put it in the hole. And remember, when I trimmed that handle down, I left that shoulder on the handle, so the handle will only go into the mallet so far. So I just use a scrap piece of wood and tap it into that mallet until I hit the shoulder. And just like anything else, clean that glue up, because if not, you'll see it when you put the finish on. That goes with stain, oil, paint, anything. Clean that glue up. So that's what I'm doing here, is cleaning the glue up. Then after you clean the glue up, it's time to here we are here, I'm putting the wedge in. And same thing with that scrap 2x4, hammer it in until it won't go anymore. You don't have to hit it super hard, just hammer it in until it won't go anymore. And that's between that and the glue, that's what's going to keep it tight in there. You could use this mallet if you wanted to, and then once you got that wedge in there good and tight, you would take it over to the miter saw, or if you had a flush cut saw, and just trim it off. And where I trimmed off that wedge, I did have to sand that area again. So again, I just sanded it to 220, no big deal. And the reason you see that cutting board back is something was left sitting on top of it before that oil was fully cured. So I just had to give it a quick sanding, and I'm going to put another coat of oil on it. Odies oil does take like 3 to 5 days to fully cure. So keep that in mind if you ever put Odies oil on something. It says it right on the label. And it's no big deal if you have something happen, because again, you just sand it down and you put another coat on it. So this is me just, wiping it down with alcohol before I put any Odies oil on it. And now I'm mixing it up, and I use my little Scotch-Brite pad, and I put a coat of Odies oil on it, and I come back in about 45 minutes and I wipe it off. I'm using old socks right now because I just got a bunch of new socks and I have all kinds of old socks. When you're wiping it off, though, just be sure that you continue to use a clean part of that rag, and because it does get filled with the oil, and you'll never get all the oil off unless you continue to rotate it to a clean part of the rag. All right, and here's the finished product, the wooden mallet and the cutting board. And I appreciate you guys sticking around and watching this week's Weaver's Wood Shop, and we will see you next week.